want to welcome you today and thank you for joining us in extraordinary circumstances through a blizzard if you are joining us from New England. And thank you for sharing that with us already. We're here today for part one in a three-part series, and we could not be more fortunate with who's been coming on to speak with us for these talks. When we wanted to do a winter series to connect with people from the Blackstone Valley and fortunately all over the world, we could think of no better topic than work. Work is, of course, at the center of what we talk about within the park, and particularly at one of our historic sites at Old Slater Mill in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. And we got thinking about the fact that Slater Mill is both our place of work and a historic workplace, and surrounded by lots of mills and factories that other people call places of work, but in some new and kind of extraordinary ways. This explains the invitation to three artists from Hope Artiste Village. They're just down the road and they approach art completely differently and work with fascinating audiences and materials. Just a reminder, this program is being recorded. We encourage you to have your microphone muted, but please feel free to keep your camera on if that's more comfortable for you. If you're just joining us, just to give you a brief overview of what we plan on doing today, we're going to be talking with our three panelists from the Hope Artiste Village, and we're trying to start this series by thinking about the balance that people have been struggling to strive over the past year. It was actually over 200 years ago that an early activist put out a call for 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, and 8 hours for what you will, for recreation. If 8 hours only of work sounds a little bit luxurious to you, you're not alone. A lot of people spend many hours in the day just trying to get through all the tasks that they have to do to survive or to make a living. But it was fairly early in the Industrial Revolution that people started to say that there needed to be a change in how people structured their time. Over the next three talks, we're going to explore that from three very different angles and wanted to start with new uses for old buildings. During the hour today, you'll hear from Carrie, Jess, and Anastasia about the way that they work in the Hope Complex, as well as a short history of both Slater Mill and the building that they work in today. Again, I just want to thank our co-hosts from the Blackstone River Valley National Historical Park, as well as from the National Heritage Corridor. I'd like to give you a little bit of a longer bio of our panelists, and then my colleague Mark is going to tell you more about the history of Slater Mill, our historic building that we're privileged to work in. Anastasia Azure combines ancient weaving, traditional metal smithing, and new materials to create sculpture and jewelry. Her work is hand-woven on a floor loom with metals inspired by the elegance of geometry and the complexity of science. If you're wondering what that means, please feel free to take a look at what's behind her in her photo. Her camera is on. Her work is fantastic. We're also thrilled to be joined today by Jess and Carrie from the Outsider Collective. If we were all standing in the Hope Artiste Village, we'd have to take a few turns in that old mill building, and we'd be walking between their two spaces. The mission of the Outsider Collective is to build community and belonging through art of every ability. The Outsider Collective provides a safe, loving, and open space to create and working together while sharing artwork with community. The two founders are here with us today, and they are wonderful artists in their own right. When Mark and I were preparing for this program, we took a walk around their complex, and Jess and Carrie's artists were having way too much fun for us to knock on the door, so we kept going. From here, I'd like to open it up to my colleague Mark, who's going to give us some background on the history of Slater Mill and a little bit of insight into what's been happening with new uses for old spaces. Also, thank you for sharing where you're from in the chat. Keep that coming as we continue.
Thanks, Allison. And thank all of you for joining us here today on this snowy afternoon. It's great to be here with all of you. We're really excited to get this winter series up and off the ground today. So as Allison mentioned, I want to talk to you a little bit today about our historic building that we as National Park Service employees help to interpret and preserve today. And that history of how different laborers, different workers have literally and figuratively left their mark on the building, and how the building has been rethought, reused, and how we use it today. And so we're going to get started here with a beautiful photo of old Slater Mill right there in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, the old yellow mill. And of course, the man for whom the building is named, Samuel Slater, there in the upper left-hand portion of your screen. As early as the 1830s, the old yellow mill in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, has been referred to as Old Slater Mill. And there's many superlatives we can give to this building, right? The first water-powered cotton spinning mill in North America, the birthplace of the American Industrial Revolution. We could go on and on with all these superlatives. Um, and I think oftentimes in the past and still to today, Slater, in many people's minds, both historically and in our own times, is the primary focus of the story. And in many ways, right, it's a fascinating story, right? It's a great story. The young English immigrant seeking opportunity in the United States, given his shot by Moses Brown, achieving the beginning of economic independence, right? This is a nice story. It makes us feel good. But in many ways, I think this interpretation is a flawed one, that we just solely associate this building and its story with that of Samuel Slater. Sure, Slater brought knowledge with him, but he didn't build the machines by himself. He didn't build the dam and the raceway by himself. He didn't construct the building. He didn't provide money to fund the venture. He didn't operate the machines by himself. Numerous laborers, none of whom have their names on the side of the building, left their physical and hypothetical marks on this place. One of them was a man by the name of Abijah Washburn. Washburn was one of the carpenters who built the mill. And we can still see in images like this, their physical marks. These are hand-hewn beams where we can still see the physical marks of that carpenter on the beams within the 1793 section of the mill. Then there's Ozil and David Wilkinson, the Wilkinson father and son team who helped the young Samuel Slater build the machines. Specifically, the carding engine, which we see an image of here on the left-hand side of the screen, and the spinning frame, the throstle spinner that we see on the right-hand side of the image here. Both of these images are courtesy of the Smithsonian Institute, who are the current owners, the current holders of these two original machines that were constructed here in Pawtucket. But Ozil and David left their physical marks on these machines. They constructed these machines alongside Samuel Slater. Then there's a man by the name of Benjamin Kingsley. Kingsley was a plasterer, and plastering a building was a fireproofing technique in the 1790s. And we see many attempts to make Slater Mill a fireproof or at least fire resistant building, right? Think about what you're doing. You have these cotton spinning operations. You have all these little tiny cotton fibers flying around. It is the perfect recipe for disaster and fires. And Slater Mill itself has survived several fires throughout the course of its life. But plastering was one means to help to ideally prevent fires from really causing major damage within a building, such as a textile mill. And Kingsley left his physical mark with the plaster that he placed over the beams and the walls of Slater Mill. Here, I love this this post that we can still see in the 1818-1820 edition of the mill here. Literally layers of history, all these layers of paint and plaster that have built up on these posts over the years, seeing that handiwork of numerous laborers through the years, literally leaving their mark of their work on one of these posts in the mill. Then there's individuals like Anne Arnold. Anne Arnold was a 10-year-old girl who worked for Slater in Slater Mill. Now, in the 1790s, we didn't have any photographs yet. So unfortunately, I cannot show you an actual photograph of Anne Arnold. But I really like this image of these children who were industrial textile workers, right? And you look into their faces, these young children who were operating these machines, right? And kind of the disillusioned, kind of distant look, especially in that young girl there in the front of the image, right? Her face always captures really this kind of disparity and this kind of sense of almost lost, this distant look. This image always kind of gives me chills when I look at it and we contemplate what child labor did to many of these children who worked in these mills. But Anne Arnold, certainly in a pivotal part in the process of what happened in Slater Mill, working those machines early on in the 1790s. Over the following decades, the mill was expanded 7 times in its lifetime to keep up with newer, larger factories in the Blackstone River Valley. Hundreds of laborers came to work in this mill over those decades, over those 2 centuries worth of time in which it was actually in operation, a century and a half in which it was actually in operation. And they did more than just cotton spinning. I love this image here from the latter half of the 19th century, showing how the mill had multiple uses. As time went on, it wasn't really the best structure to just do cotton spinning in. So the owners of the mill subbed out different sections of the mill for different purposes. So we see here in this image, the mill looking much larger than it does today. But the Pawtucket Electro Planting Company, the Pawtucket Steamboat Company, a jeweler that was operating in Slater Mill. Individual workers in the mill over time produced cord, twine, bicycles, parts for steamboats, coffins, and more. One of those workers from the latter half of the 19th century, early 20th century, literally left math on one of the posts that we have in Slater Mill. This is one of my other favorite posts that we have. And this also is in the 1818, 1820 edition of the mill, where we literally can see this worker. Have you ever done math out on a workbench or something like that? I do stuff like this all the time. We literally can see what we would call, I guess, good graffiti, right? Historical graffiti, something that tells us, right? Something about the workers there and physically connects us. We can still see the handwriting of this individual as they did math out on this post within Slater Mill. In 1921, though, the story started to change again when wealthy industrialists here in the valley spearheaded a movement to purchase and restore the mill. And thus began the conversion of the site from a place of work to a historic site. And this is when the restoration of the mill to its 1830 appearance happened. And here is an image from 1949 showing the mill as it looks today. Basically, the decision is made to cut the mill back in size to as it would have appeared in 1832. So it is not as it was when it was purchased in 1921. It was restored to its 1832 appearance shortly thereafter the building's purchase in 1921. After the building's purchased by the 1950s, we really start to see the site open as a historic museum that is regularly visited by the public. And then the story of the workers there started to change, right? Now the workers weren't physically making things, but they were showing people around the place. They were explaining the past and the history to them and demonstrating the importance of these buildings. And the workers, the laborers in this place were also preserving the buildings so that way future generations could continue to come and visit the location. And certainly for a century of time, from 1921 to 2021, Old Slater Mill Association did a fantastic job at preserving and interpreting the site throughout their years of ownership of the building. And this is an image here in the Sylvanus Brown House of a young tour guide doing a demonstration in the basement of the Brown House there. And I love this image here, the gentleman there in the center of the photo with the plaid pants. Nothing says the 1970s, 1980s like a pair of pants like that, right? So this really neat image of interpreters demonstrating the importance of these historic buildings that are on our site. And that work still continues today. Now Old Slater Mill is Allison and my place of work. As it is the place of work of the gentleman that you see here in the picture, we see a group of people gathered around the 1835 throstle spinner in this image, with Ranger Andy demonstrating that building actually working, that machine actually working. Sorry, not the building actually working, the machine actually working. Now, this is our place of work. And it's our job as National Park Service staff members to tell those stories and to preserve the building in perpetuity for future generations. In the end, I guess my point to all of this is it's more than just cotton spinning, and it's even more than just the Industrial Revolution. At its core, the building tells the story of people at work in a changing world. And man, oh man, if there is anything that we can relate to, certainly in 2022, it's the idea of working in an ever-changing world. Similarly, other old industrial buildings have been reimagined, just like Slater, right? Slater has a certain track here of being used for industrial purposes and then being rethought of as a historic site for people to come and visit. But the Hope Webbing Company mill in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, has a slightly different trajectory that we're going to talk about today. Built by numerous laborers primarily between the years of 1889 and 1914, much of their work is still used today, and it's a testament to their skill as builders. What started as a small operation with just 15 workers tending 60 looms, making webbing for pull straps for boots in the early 1890s, grew to 460 laborers in 1897, producing 1.5 million yards of narrow fabrics each year. Then by the 1960s, the property was purchased by the Schoolhouse Candy Company, and chocolate bunnies, lollipops, and Easter baskets were made within the building. Slated to be torn down, though, in the early 2000s, the building was once again given new life, a new opportunity for modern laborers, for modern workers to reimagine this historic space for their own purposes and for their own work. Today, the mill has been repurposed for modern laborers and is home to over 127 businesses. And it's also a place where people live now, with parts of the mill being converted into apartments. We have, like Allison said, we did a little sleuthing this week. We went out and visited Hope Artiste Village, and we took some pictures, and we visited the site of our two speakers today. These two groups that are joining us today for this panel discussion, who are going to talk about their own experiences as workers reusing an old building, an old mill building for new purposes. And so with that, I'd like to turn it back over to Allison to get us started with speaking with our visitors today.
Yeah, thank you so much. We are virtually from Slater Mill today, but not actually at Slater Mill, hence our backgrounds. And we just thought it was such a wonderful opportunity to connect two different sites that have historic value. We're going to start with Anastasia, and she's going to give us a bit of a tour of her studio and tell us a little bit about the kind of art that she makes. We could not resist connecting a cotton spinning factory that made thread with a contemporary artist who totally reimagines weaving in a way that Samuel Slater never could have. So we're going to go ahead and turn it over to her and try to get that clip up.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Allison and Mark. This is really a pleasure to be part of this series. And it is amazing to work in a historic textile mill as a contemporary textile artist. And I blend jewelry metal arts, which also has a rich history here in Providence of costume jewelry from the 50s. So I feel like it's just so auspicious to be in a great location for doing the artwork that I create. And I have a little tour of my studio, and I will just kind of talk over it as we walk through my space that I did not clean up for this presentation. So you will actually get a feel for the art process and all of the tools that get left out. And it's just a joy to open this door every single morning. I have a 1,000-square-foot studio space with skylights and southern exposed windows and 2 stories. It's incredible. It honestly is better than a dream come true. So this is just kind of a little tour of the front area where I've got some of my gallery work and work by Outsider Collective artists as well. That is the sculptural work that I'm known for, which are these kind of large scale sculptures hand woven from dyed fishing line and wire. So I'm using an ancient Peruvian weaving technique to create cloth that has 2 layers, and it's how those layers intersect that I'm able to form these really unique sculptural objects. Oh my gosh, I'm obsessed with this floor. It's 2-part epoxy from the early 1900s that they're not able to like get up, and it's so beautiful. Okay, floor interruption for a minute. And then this is the project that I'm working on currently. It is about gravitational waves that occur when 2 black holes collide. So I have a commission that I am creating the work for a lobby up at MIT. So that's the lobby there, and it's going to be framed weaving, which is a new direction for me. This past 2 years with my COVID residency, I've taken to galactic cosmic realms and have been studying about gravitational waves. So all of last year, I did a lot of experimentation with suspended sculptures. It was really an amazing opportunity to have a year to myself. I let all of my assistants go and had the studio for the first time to just play. So I started doing hanging work, and here we go, a little mobile. And that's kind of this idea of the gravitational waves as these 2 black holes spin. So basically the gravitational waves send out a ripple in space-time, and they stretch the fabric of space-time. It's just absolutely incredible. So I've been in the space at Hope Artiste, in this particular space I'm going on my 4th year, and that was my sink, my treasured sink. Oh my goodness, as an artist, that's like the best thing ever. And I have a fully operational jewelry studio as well. So part of it is the gallery workspace. Here we're in the jewelry studio. And then at the back, we'll be getting to the looms. So my background is in jewelry metal art. So I am professionally trained as a goldsmith, and it was in undergrad at the California College of the Arts that I learned how to weave. And as a weaver or as a jeweler, like what else would I weave with but wire? So one thing kind of led to another, and I found myself looking for weights to tension wire on a loom because it's a little tricky to do. And I was looking at fishing weights, and then I saw the fishing line, and that's what I've been doing since 2004. So it's really been a focus. And I came to the Rhode Island area to go to Rhode Island School of Design. So I have my master's degree in textiles, and it's a matter of how to make it really unique by combining other materials and color and creating these dimensional pieces. And then also having a beautiful studio space. I mean, this is this passion flower vine that I have growing because of the beautiful sunlight that comes in and the historic brick that's there. And it's just amazing. And so this is the kind of impersonal experience of being there, and we're getting to the loom. Here we go. We're slowly approaching it. I'm using, floor looms that were made in Saugus, Massachusetts in, the 1900s. And it's just a traditional floor loom that I'm using my hand and weaving with. So that's kind of my studio space. And yeah, we can pass it off to Outsider Collective because they are incredible. And so I guess let me just take a moment to talk about the community at the Hope Artiste Village, because that's my little space, but that space is part of this amazing, amazing community of entrepreneurs and creatives. And I mean, it is incredible, all of the people that are there. And so the Outsider Collective is down the hall from me, and they have amazing classes and support artists with disabilities. And it's been an honor to work with them over the past year. I go in and I teach classes on Fridays, and just the sense of community. And there's a lot happening in the mill that it's very active. So I can just pass that over to Outsider Collective and they can explain their awesomeness.
I have a video that I'm going to share that was filmed by one of our friends at Blackstone Valley Tourism Council. And then I'll leave it to Jess afterwards to talk a little bit about us. Share screen. It was short, but studio and some of the work that we do. So I'll leave it to Jess.
Hi, I'm Jess, one of the co-founders, along with Carrie Hyde-Riley of Outsider Collective. And Anna, thank you so much for showing your beautiful studio. We love visiting you, and we love you visiting our studio and teaching on Fridays. And our participants and artists just absolutely love you. So thank you for being our neighbor at the Hope Artiste Village. So you saw a little bit of our video of our beautiful studio that we just absolutely love. We love being in the Hope Artiste Village. What we do at Outsider Collective is we are a community art space and gallery, and we serve artists of all abilities. So we're open 10 to 4 every day, and Carrie is our main art instructor. She's a RISD grad, and we teach artists with all abilities. So people will come in, and artists who aren't really sure exactly what their passion is, exactly, you know, what they're great at. And that's where I think one of our strengths are, where Carrie is able to teach our folks and help them get their passions out and get their hidden talents out. And so not only do we do visual art, we have music programs, and we have different artists within the Hope Artiste Village come and teach our folks, just like Anna does every Friday. We've teamed up with Kismet Improv as well. They do improv classes for us, for our folks once every 2 weeks. And we just, the community at the Hope Artiste Village is what really drew us there. I know for myself, and I can probably speak for Carrie as well, we really wanted to be in the Hope Artiste Village even before, you know, Outsider Collective was a thing. Like we weren't looking anywhere else but the village. And so we were lucky enough to get a small studio space in 2019, where we were just a gallery showcasing the artwork of artists at Resources for Human Development, which was a day program. They started in Pawtucket, and that's where Carrie and I met. We were working there. I was the manager of the community team. Carrie was the manager of the art team. So we got together, and, you know, we decided to just open up this little gallery space, you know, and we just absolutely loved it. The farmers market was there, tons of community and lots of foot traffic. And then COVID hit. So we really had to figure out what we were going to do next. So a bigger space opened up right across the hall from us, and we decided to take that on and take on artist members. So now we've got about 20 members who come and They do artwork, they take classes, workshops, they do their own independent artwork. We've got an artist who hand dyes silk scarves. We do music, and we just do so much fun stuff that, we're, even though, COVID was very, very unfortunate, it really helped us kind of expand into what we really wanted to do. And yeah, we're very excited to be at the Hope Artiste Village. And even just being in the village, just how beautiful it is. I don't know if you were able to see in our video, we've got these amazing windows right above us and these high ceilings and these beautiful, beautiful floors that we just absolutely love. So we're very lucky to be in the Hope Artiste Village. And Carrie, I don't know if you want to add in anything.
Yeah, I think like the big thing that we wanted to do was create like an artist community, and choosing a place that had artists that are working like Anna was a huge draw to us. And also kind of, we wanted to create a community for artists with disabilities to have natural supports and like be alongside other working artists. And our whole goal is to break down the barriers between like professionally trained artists and outsider artists that have this huge potential and passion. And it couldn't have happened in any other building. It was because of the mill layout and the community that was already there that has just made the experience that we're able to provide our members, and then the other like 20 some artists that aren't members that still come in and use our space. Like it makes our program that much more successful and wonderful. And like all of our artists have made friends within the village with people in different stores, and the amount of just like community events that we can participate in has just been incredible. So that's my little
Yeah, and I'll just add that the Hope Artiste Village, it really fosters like creative collaboration, because we're all there, we're all creating and doing stuff, and it's just being in that building, we're all connected in a way, and we get to meet different artists, and that's how we met Anna. And the Village Theater is right next door to us, and we collaborate with them. And I feel like people are just attracted to our space as well, because we're kind of loud and there's a lot of energy in our space, and people really want to see what's going on, and then they meet our artists. And it's just like Carrie said, the natural supports for the artists that we support is just, it's so valuable to them and to us, and to be able to provide that and to be able to have the space to do what we love to do.
I just want to thank all three of you so much for taking us into your studios. One of the pleasures of working with artists in the job that we do is artists will frequently say, oh, I just made a little video, and then it's aesthetically stunning, and we get this wonderful interpretive insider's view of what you do. So those are both excellent kind of snapshots of where you work. Just something to kind of underline about that complex and for us to think about. 100 years ago, there was nothing inevitable about the Slater Mill building becoming a museum of the kind that it is today. Just as there was nothing inevitable about this busy, busy complex making these very specific kinds of textiles, repetitive rote work over and over, blossoming into the place that you're talking about today. When you read descriptions of Hope now, or you visit there now, you're greeted with these wonderful smells from bakers. There's the sights of people making art. There's sounds of people laughing, selling things, making things, living in the complex. A very kind of strange sight if we were to drop a time traveler who had worked at Hope a century ago into there today, to say that there are all of these also women-owned businesses, right? Women entrepreneurs who run all of these things within a welcoming space. one of the questions that came up that I think speaks really well to this for all of you is whether you feel a connection to the history of the space as you work with people and make art there.
I can start with that. I feel most connected to the space with the floor, which is kind of a funny thing to say, but there is such a history to all of the footsteps that have been worn there, the two-part epoxy paint that they can't scrape off, and all of these marks and gouges. And there's just something that's so exquisite about that, and the bricks, and there is this connection to the physical building. As far as like, you know, as a weaver, thinking about the other weavers that had been there years ago, that's not something that is on my mind frequently. When I first moved into Hope Artiste Village, I actually had a studio space in the basement, and above me was a printing press. And the printing press made all of this noise, a rhythmic noise. And it was during that time that I had an appreciation for what it was like and the level of noise and all of the, you know, machinery that was happening. And that's kind of how I feel connected to the history of the space. And then as far as the contemporary uses of the space, just walking down the hallway is like so inspiring, and seeing all that's going on there. And it's just an amazing place to be.
Yeah, I agree with Anna on everything, especially with the floors. I know that's something that Carrie and I just absolutely love, and that, you know, our space has the original floors. A lot of the Hope Artiste Village studios have the original flooring in there, and it's like they're beautiful hardwood floors. They're marked up, and you just can't help but think, like, what was the history? Who was in the studio on this floor, you know, so many years ago? And then just being in the Hope Artiste Village and just walking the halls, like Anna said, is, I don't know, there's an energy to it, and we just feel so happy to be there and blessed to be there, and, you know, amongst so many others that are creating as well. So it's a great energy.
Yeah, I think, like, with the history of the building, if we were to have a studio in like a new pristine place, there would be this like sense of like wanting to protect it, and like having this history and stuff, and like being part of it. There's something as an artist that's really nice about like being like, no, we're adding more to the history. That like being there and using it because it's always been used. It's something that like being attached to that space in that way is really comforting as an artist.
That is the most generous reading of Making a Mess I've ever heard. I love it. I'm going to say that I'm adding to the history of the structure of which I am occupying the next time I make a mess or scuff the walls. So another great question that we got in the chat has to do with some of the drawbacks, of which there are certainly some, right, of working in an old building. There can be challenges with internet access. There can be challenges with noise or smells, especially in terms of accessibility and some of the work that all of you do with your workshops. How have you met some of those challenges, or what have been some of the strategies that you've used to overcome some very real physical barriers to access in some of these places?
Do you mind if I go? I think, like, especially with the work that we do at Outsider Collective and in working with people that have all different accessibility needs, it was very when we wanted to expand, it was very specific, the space that we needed to get in order to go from a small gallery to a workable art program. We were very fortunate that the space that was available, that probably wouldn't have been available to us if it wasn't for COVID, is right next to an accessible like ramp, and we've been able to work with the building to add more accessible parking for our folks, and they've been accommodating and understanding that we want to make it more accessible for everybody. It's a hard building to get around with like a lot of different hallways and different spaces, and so whenever we're trying to get our new members to come in and trying to be specific about where to go, that's sometimes can be a little bit difficult, but then it's also like they get to explore an amazing building, and then every like the few times that it's like, oh, where are you, and like we get to run in and then show everybody around. Like, I don't know, there's something nice about exploring in that way, but the rooms are huge though, that we've been able, that we have, and so we've been able to like utilize this incredibly large space in order to make it accessible for everybody that wants to come in. So that's been a plus, and it's been more of a plus. Yeah,
I agree with Carrie. I mean, where our space is, it's very easily accessible. We advocated for more accessible parking spots, and that was super easy with the management at Hope Artiste Village. And it is, I think, one of the drawbacks. It is a little hard to get around. There's so many entrances and hallways, and it's a little mazy, but I mean, like Carrie said, it's beautiful. There's so much. There's the Rhode Island Music Hall of Fame. There's all these hundreds of paper cranes on the ceiling of the industrial hallway. Like, so much to look at. It's interesting. So if you do get lost, it's not the worst thing in the world.
I'm going to just jump in here as well and agree that navigating the mill is one of the biggest challenges of having people come to my space. And Outsider Collective is really fortunate. They are on the main retail hallway. So it is a pretty straight shot through the main door to find them, as well as the handicap accessible ramp is in the main courtyard, and all those doors are kept open. I'm down one of the small parallel tributaries, and the doors to my space or from the outside on Dudley Street are locked. So that is a challenge of having employees and customers come into my space. And that's, again, like they said, people then have the opportunity to navigate and tour this beautiful space. As far as other challenges that I've experienced with being in a historic mill is roof leaking. and how to combat that was moving things out of the way where the leaks were. And it had to do with, where the windows came to the roof and the fact that it is an old building. So there are things that happen, and the maintenance is pretty good about taking care of things. It was about 2 years for them to fix the roof. And I came that close to having to put my rent into escrow. So there are things that happen and are interesting to, be part of. And what is so exciting is that the back half of the Hope Artiste Village, they redid this whole structure for the live work. Actually, they're not workspaces, they're living loft spaces. So in the past, 3 years, to see this old shell of a building now turn into, I don't even know how many hundreds of living spaces, has just been incredible. So this idea that the expansion is just continuing, and this revitalization of giving new life to these spaces in Pawtucket is just an amazing energy to be around.
I agree with Anna on that one.
Chris, do you want to say a little bit more? You come into Outsider Collective quite frequently and do a lot of artwork there.
Oh, excuse me. Sorry, I didn't realize about that, that's all. I was just working on this the other day.
So Chris is a very talented artist who works at the Outsider Collective and actually has become my friend and comes to my studio to work as well. He does a lot of painting and 3D sculptures that have to do with underwater creatures as well as land creatures and futuristic visions. So again, it's so inspirational getting to work with artists of all abilities in the space and making friendships.
Hey, Chris, thanks for joining.
My pleasure. Sorry, hope I didn't want to cause you any trouble or anything, Jess.
No, of course not.
Didn't advertise Sea Life, but I'm glad we got to see it. So you never know. It's a live program. Anything can happen. We also had some questions for you about kind of depth of knowledge about working in the space. Mark and I happen to occupy office space along with our colleagues in places where part of our job is to kind of know layers and layers of history of what went on in that structure, right? To know a little bit more about the backstory behind graffiti or why a floor might look as it does. And two different questions that kind of go together nicely. One is about for visitors or other occupants, how much might they know based on signage and information that's around in the structure? And then how much do you have access to in terms of looking at floor plans or knowing what exactly happened in your studio historically?
That's a great question. I haven't really seen much historical data or floor plans like posted around the Hope Artiste Village. I do know on their website there is a great background of the history of the building, the Hope Webbing company, and what they did there, the textiles, and all the different weaving sheds and what the space looked like back then. I would love to see pictures of it inside, like prior to, when they were doing all the textiles back in the day. And I would love to see pictures of that. I haven't seen those around. And I unless they're hidden somewhere, I don't see much posted around the Hope Artiste Village.
I would love to see a floor plan. Like, how exciting to find out what exactly was in the location where I am is kind of interesting. And one of the things that I'm really grateful for as an entrepreneur and being in this revitalized mill space is having the freedom to express myself. And when I think of the history of the mill space, like Mark had shown the picture of Slater Mill and the young children workers that were there doing it. So, we come into this mill now and it's our joy and we're working from our passion, where decades ago, that wasn't the case. People were coming to this mill and had a really difficult life where they needed to kind of have the 8-hour workday and really just try and, like you were saying, the history of that, of trying to not work as much because the 8 hours that they did work at the mill was grueling work. And what I find so interesting about the Hope Webbing space is that it changed from being a textile mill to a candy factory. Like, what a transition. And the Hope Artiste Village used to have the farmers markets, and it was great. It brought in a lot of traffic when the farmers markets were there. And I had a gentleman come in, an older gentleman who had worked at the mill when it was a candy factory. And he said he couldn't believe all of the change that has happened. And it was just really amazing to speak with an old timer that had been running one of the candy machines.
I think my favorite historical anecdote that most people know that work in the building is the Breaktown Bowling alley, because when they were renovating it, they found it on the 3rd floor, and it's where the workers used to go and enjoy their time on their breaks. And so when they discovered it, they revitalized it and put it back in. And so it's a hand, like they hand set up all of the pins now, like it used to be. And I like that there's that sort of history that they discovered and didn't decide to hide, instead of they embraced it.
Mark has shared in the chat a fantastic resource, an article put out by Rhode Island Historical Society just a few years ago that tracks the evolution of the different companies in the complex and also talks about some of the challenges that went into redeveloping the space. We also had an extremely important question, which is, do you ever still smell candy while you are at work?
No, we don't, except we do have a chocolatier diagonally from us now, Diva Dips. So they do a bunch of chocolate, but I've always wanted to just like stroll through the hallways and find a lollipop or something hidden from the candy factory days. I think that would be pretty cool, but it hasn't happened yet.
I think it could be the ghosts of the children that are still among us in that factory. That's my guess.
The pies smell too good in order for us to actually smell the candy. Because we got an amazing pie person who bakes wonderful pies, and it just smells like pies all day.
So Deborah shared with us that she actually worked in Hope in the complex in the 1970s. And now the portion that she worked in is private residential. So there are a lot of portions of this larger complex that are open to the public, very welcoming to the public. But of course, part of it is private too. So that's been another change that's happened in recent years. From your perspective, there was also a question really just about foot traffic and maybe a different way to think about this. What has the past year been like in relation to other years in terms of having people visit you or COVID protocols? If you could talk about that.
One of the reasons initially why we started leasing at the Hope Artiste Village was because of the foot traffic from the farmers market. And so we had one season of that foot traffic, and it was amazing. I mean, there were just hundreds and hundreds of people walking through the halls, and we were right there in the retail hallway, in front of all of the busyness, right across the hall from where the coffee was. So we got a lot of foot traffic that way. And then, with COVID and the Farm Fresh moving into their own space, which was great, we had to reinvent ourselves and figure out, okay, what are we doing? So we started our membership program. So we brought our members into our space. So we don't rely on the foot traffic any longer. I think the Hope Artiste Village management, they've been trying really hard to get different markets going. And I know a few of the artists tried to do, artist markets and stuff, which were really successful. And they're starting to do like Valentine's Day and St. Patty's Day events and different events for the holidays, which is drawing in more people. I think one big thing with the mill, the Hope Artiste Village, is there's not a lot of signage outside to show what's going on inside. And when people actually come in for the first time, they can't believe that all of this is going on, but they just didn't realize that there was so much happening. So I think for a lot of the studios and the artists in the village, I think not having Farm Fresh there is a little bit of a drawback, but hopefully once COVID is, I don't know, once we're through this whole COVID situation, I think things are just going to get better and better for us in the village.
I'm just going to dovetail on that, Jess, and agree that having Farm Fresh move and the farmers market move to a new building really, was a decline in foot traffic as well as business. I would have my studio space, I would transform the first third of it into a gallery space, and every Saturday from 9 to 1 p.m. in the winter market, which was like November to March, I would have sales. And that was an incredible thing to have people walk into my studio and be purchasing jewelry. So there was a decline in that. And it's interesting because it happened basically when COVID happened. I think there was one winter that they were was the last farmer's market. So for me, I now shut my door, which has been a really big change. I used to have my door open all the time, and it was a welcoming space that people were always interested to come and explore. And it's been nice to have the space to myself in the sense of having a COVID residency for 2021. And right now it's starting to open back up, and I have an intern as well as an assistant. So I feel like there's a shift happening with COVID. And again, like Jess had mentioned, having some more signage would be really helpful so that people had an understanding of where things were and all of the amazing, businesses and artwork that's happening there.
So we have just a few moments left before 2 o'clock. While we kind of let any last second questions come in, if you all could just drop in the chat anything you have coming up that you might want people to know about. Some folks were also asking about specific workshops, the Outsider Collective, or that you, Anna, might be offering. So that would be helpful if you could drop that in. We're also going to link to the next part of this series. It's wonderful that you brought up the candy and the bowling. Part of what we're looking to discuss over this 3-part series is the different ways that people have made sense of their lives as workers. It's something we talk about as part of our history of the United States at Slater Mill, but we're living in this moment where we're reading about factories and bridges collapsing right before people's eyes on the news. We're reading about what might be characterized as a massive general strike, millions of people quitting their jobs, changing their jobs, resigning, and all of these major changes. When we think about the kind of dream of 8 hours for work to live, 8 hours to do what you wish, and 8 hours to rest, we know that that's something activists wanted 200 years ago, and it's still elusive for a lot of people. With our next discussion, we're going to be joined by Professor Robert Forant, who is up at the University of Massachusetts Lowell, as well as folks representing the National Museum of Mental Health Project. We're going to talk a bit more about initiatives like having a bowling alley at your job, or having food provided at your job, or beanbag chairs, as well as the history of industrial accidents, to think about different ways that people have considered wellness in relationship to their work. That will be happening on February 12th. And on February 26th, we are partnering with pedal-powered Anthropology. Sadly, not a bike ride, it is a Zoom program, but we'll be talking about the history of the bicycle as a thing that was made at Slater Mill, as a thing that people rode at Slater Mill, as well as how Joe Lionworm, who runs that initiative, does historical research about difficult topics from his bicycle, which is not easy to do in Rhode Island. So on behalf of myself and the park, I really want to thank you all for coming today, for braving a blizzard and having this chat with us.